I thought long and hard about producing this video, and then I thought, why am I thinking long and hard about this when it is something that I have a certain amount of experience with, and I think it's a subject that people are interested in and people should know about and people should be aware of. It's something that you may need to use at some time in the future. But first, let's talk about stress and depression, not mental health. I think mental health is something else. Mental health is something that I don't feel that qualified to talk about because I've never suffered from mental health. I've never particularly thought about it in my own situation. I've dealt with mental health only kind of in a third-hand situation, but we will come to that later on. What I'm talking about is stress, depression, which are quite often just lumped under the umbrella of mental health, and in my opinion it's a different thing. Let's look at stress and depression in the young. We live in a society now that is social media, it's running at 90 miles an hour, much faster than the generation that I grew up in when I was born in the mid-50s. Yes, we had stress and depression then, and the reason it was just as important and just as impactful, although probably nowhere near as prevalent, is because we lived in a different world and our triggers were different, were less. But the result of those triggers were no less traumatic. But nowadays, I wouldn't like to be a kid growing up today. I wouldn't like to be a young adult bringing up a young family today. Let's look at kids, the things they have to put up with, the peer pressure. Growing up, actually just growing into the world, taking on a bit more responsibility, maturity, school, social media, the pressure put on people, young people through social media, young people whose emotions probably aren't mature enough for them to combat that, to rationalise that, to pigeonhole certain things that they don't want to impact on them. And it's like a maelstrom of emotions going on. And when you get kids, you may think that they are basically inventing illnesses, inventing symptoms. I don't think so. I think that new experiences are coming along all the time. New pressures are coming along all the time without the available outlets, the available categories to pigeonhole your emotions into. So people have to come up with new categories, and young people come up with categories that are probably more emotional than older people. It's a whole mad world that young people are growing up in, and then we wonder why a lot of them are so depressed, lonely, excluded by peers and friends for no particular reason. And then as you get older, the pressures of bringing up a family, the pressures of work, peer pressure again, financial pressure. And I think that's what it boils down to. And the thing is, as you get older and you're under these financial pressures and emotional pressures, family pressures, pressures to fit into society, that you can rationalise and you can disseminate this. Then you can go down this whole intellectual rabbit hole that just drives you down into depression and stress. And I don't think we can underestimate the impact of stress and depression on young people and older people and old people like me. I've still got the stress of finances. There's lots of health stress. I mean, I'm looking down the barrel of my own mortality now because, I'm coming to the end of my life, which has been foreshortened by illness. But then again, you can look back. If you can look back on a life well spent, like I think I can, then you can mitigate that stress to a certain extent. And that's the position I'm in now. I'm very fortunate. I'm happy. If I go tomorrow, I'm happy. But there is a facility out there that I feel is sometimes been mocked, been belittled, been shunned, because I think it doesn't kind of fit the modern narrative. It's not colourful enough. It's not, to the most part, peopled by individuals with radical views and radical hair colours and radical jewellery. For the most part. But it certainly is to a certain extent, and we will come on to that one very shortly. For several years I was a Samaritan, and it's something I'd like to talk about. I was a Samaritan probably up to about 10 years ago, and that's a long time. And things within the Samaritan organisation may have changed, but I think basic edicts have stayed the same. So I think what I'm going to tell people is relevant. Now I answered the telephone, I was on the outreach team that used to go out to churches, schools, places like that. I was on the training team, I was on the selection team, I was on the team that used to go out to meet other Samaritan groups and the Samaritan hierarchy, and this inevitably ended up with you having a difference of opinions with the bosses. But that's all good and healthy, and our organisations like Samaritans carry on and adapt to the modern world. Now, people think of Samaritans as a anti-suicide, suicide prevention organisation. Well, it isn't. You are not there to tell people what to do. You are not there to influence people. You are there to listen. You are there to add empathy. Listen. You can do a telephone call as a Samaritan with somebody, get fantastic results at the end of the day, and all you've said is, yeah, okay, yeah, empathy. You're there to listen. You are non-judgmental, and that is the greatest thing about Samaritans. You are non-judgmental. You can have phone calls from people in prison who've done the most horrendous things, but they're treated exactly the same as everyone else. It's complete anonymity. You don't know who these people are, where they're calling from. They don't know who you are, what part of the organisation in the geography of the country is answering that call, and you're there just to listen. Not just to listen, but hopefully you are there to encourage the people who are phoning in to think about the problems and to try to draw their own conclusions. And if that's a good result at the end of the day, then you've done your job very well. You're there to listen, because listening is so important. People sit at home with nobody to talk to, things going on in their heads, and all they need is somebody to listen. Not your family, because what your family will do and what your friends will do, you will tell them what your problems are, and they will say, oh, well, that happened to me and I did this. Oh, what you want to do is this. No, it could not be farther from the truth. You are there to listen. Listen and try to kind of direct the conversation and direct their thoughts towards facing the problems, assessing the problems, working the way through the problems. And hopefully at the end of that call, which may be brief or maybe longer, not too long, and we'll come to that again, but you're encouraging them. And at the end of the day, when they put that phone down and you put the phone down, you can come away thinking, yeah, I think we did okay there. Doesn't always happen. It does not always happen. And it can be very stressful and very tragic. Something else we'll come to in the fullness of time. The training for Samaritans is very thorough, very long, and actually can change your mindset completely. I've always been quite empathetic and understanding. I've tried to be, but training as a Samaritan is all about empathy. And it's something that will change your mindset and something that will carry you forward through life. Now, I've trained and I've been trained. And there are lots of situations. You just don't dump a new Samaritan in a chair and say, pick that phone up. It starts off, you have discussions, and it carries on, and you learn about Samaritans because you have to know everything and stick to every little edict, because straying from it kind of corrupts the whole thing. You do role play. We used to sit on chairs. I've done it as a student, and I've done it as a mentor. And you sit on a chair back to back, and one of you, usually the mentor, the trainer, will play the person phoning in. And the person on the other chair will play the student, will play the person taking the call. And this is terrifying when you first do it and you make mistakes. And it's the tutor, the trainer's job to just jolly you along. But we're all a little bit wicked, aren't we? So you will put the student into some kind of awful situations where even you would struggle with all your experience to actually come up with the right answer or the right words that will not impact and lead somebody on a route that your words have dictated. Your emotions are neutral. You have absolutely no control apart from the listening, the empathy and the encouragement to examine. And then eventually, after all this, you will take your first call. Now, you're not left on your own to just answer calls. You have your mentor with you. And your mentor, I was a mentor for about, I think it was 2 or 3 people at one time, or 2 people at one time. And then you will, whenever you take a call, and in our branch there were 2 calls in two phones in 2 different cubicles, and you would go in and there would be 2 phones in each cubicle, and one of those would be for the mentor to listen into the conversation. So the student will pick up the call and you will pick up the phone as well, and you will listen in. And as you can hear both sides of the conversation, you will encourage, you'll put your thumbs up, you'll mouth things to say if you can, but mostly you have a piece of paper and you write down and you're listening to things, because this may be a training exercise for someone, but it's real life for the person on the other call. This is real life. They are under stress, and how much stress do you have to be under to call Samaritans? Because a lot of people see calling Samaritans as a sign of weakness, which it isn't. It's just another facility, like Asda or your local library. It's something there to be used by everyone. So you'll have pieces of paper, ask this, ask that, and then eventually you will say, please draw this call to an end. Because you can't, people will sit there for 4 or 5 hours. I'll tell you about, this happened to me, and I kind of bullied my way out of it with all the Samaritans. But you will say, and you actually trained how to bring a conversation to an end. And this is something else that you carry through life, that you find in real life. You have the ability to, if a conversation's getting heated, you have the ability to draw that conversation to an end with no offence to anyone, leaving the person who you're talking to feeling that that went well, that was okay, we had a nice discussion and all is good. And then you take your first call on your own, and then that's it, you're up and at 'em. And there are different types of calls. There's never been millions millions. It may be just somebody, some old person sitting at home who's got nobody to talk to. And that's just as relevant. There's as much right as anybody else to call in. Maybe somebody under stress because of job worries, emotional worries, marital problems, where they aren't actually thinking of self-harm, but it's kind of on the horizon. It's kind of trying to raise its ugly head in the background. So they do the right thing and they find someone to talk to, someone with empathy, somebody who will listen. They find someone to listen to them. And that is incredibly important. But it is not a suicide prevention organisation. They may be out there, but it's not. It's there for just to listen to. And if you are in that position and you manage to work your way through that and come out with your own conclusion at the end and a good answer, then all well and good. As far as I'm concerned, that is far more beneficial than having a conversation with somebody who talks you out of something, because that impression will only last as long as that conversation you've had is fresh in your mind, and then you will just revert back to type. You need someone there to encourage you to work your way through, because if you work your way through something, you can use that template to work your way through so many other stresses in life. I mentioned my long call, and this was one, and it went on for about 3 hours, and I ended up getting in trouble for that, and I kind of bullied my way out of it. I argued my way, because I can be a bit of a bullshit at times, not always, but sometimes, if I know I'm the right side of history. And it was a woman who called in. Now, Samaritans is very confidential. When you're a Samaritan, you cannot talk about anything, even to your family. You cannot specific calls. They know you're a Samaritan, but you can't talk about Samaritans. But this was years ago. I would never mention specific calls. You don't know the name or anything, but I would never go into detail about specific calls. But I took one call, and it was off someone, a woman, a lady, and I was on that call for 3 hours, and she was incredibly stressed when she phoned up. But she wasn't when she went off the call. And at the end of that call, she said to me, "Thank you so much for everything you've said and everything you've done. You don't know how much this helps and how much I'm now looking forward to getting through this." You know what? I think I said 3 hours. I think I went, yeah, okay, I'm still here. Yeah, that's all I did. I just encouraged her. That's all. She just needed someone to listen to, and I encouraged her to talk her own way through it. And then I got off that call, and after every shift, you then have to call into your manager and talk through every single call, because there's no way that Samaritans can allow you to take that stress out of the building. It's damaging to yourself, because you could have been in some very, very traumatic situations. And so I phoned my manager and we talked through calls, and she said, "What the hell were you doing for 3 hours? Blah, 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 blah." And I said to her, "Look, I was on this call and I was listening to this lady, and I could tell that we were on an upward trajectory all the way through it. If I'd have ended that call, I could have done more damage than good." So I sat on that call, and it went to its natural conclusion. And that's what I did. And that is what I would do again. And they liked me at Samaritans, so nothing was said about it, because I'm a cheery chappy and I get on with everybody. would encourage anyone to become a Samaritan. It's not for old folk, just for old fogies like me, or middle-aged people or older people. There are a lot of young people going to Samaritans, very young people, and make very, very good Samaritans. Now, I know for a fact that some of those young people are going into it primarily, yes, they want to, but also it will look very good on their CV. And I don't mind that. That's absolutely fine. And I think you're right, it will look very good on your CV. But the thing is with Samaritan training, if you don't want to do it and you aren't up to it, you won't get through it. So when you come out at the other end and you sat through that terrifying experience of your first call, then you've proved yourself. It's fine that you think it'll look good on your CV. For anybody. It doesn't matter about that. As long as you're a good Samaritan. And a lot of these young people end up being fabulous Samaritans, having a fabulous experience, and go on to have fabulous careers, where the training to become a Samaritan is probably very, very beneficial. Now, this is the part of the video that I had to think about most before I did it, but I want to do it because I think it's relevant. I think it encompasses what a lot of people think that Samaritans is all about, and it doesn't actually. There's no individual. It's just this is something that did happen and does happen occasionally. People will be wondering, what do you do? How do you treat a phone call you get off somebody who is thinking of taking their own life or is actually in the process of taking their own life? And you have to treat these phone calls with the same respect you do with all of them. There are certain little things that you do. I mean, there may be certain things that each branch does. When I took a call and you realised that this was a situation where someone was in extremis, someone had gone down that road, perhaps with tablets or something like that, or had self-harmed to a certain point, you kind of call for quiet. And in the background of a Samaritan's office, you can probably, there are usually two of you on duty, and you probably maybe hear voices, you may be to hear the phone, another phone in the background. You may be able to hear someone opening a tin of biscuits, which is all good, because I don't think anybody who's on one of these calls who's phoning in wants to feel as though they're in a vacuum. So natural sound, but non-threatening sound in the background is all to the good. But you stop that and the place goes quiet. Very, very quiet and very still. And then there is only you and that person in the world. And usually it's at night, and usually the voices are quite quiet. And it's difficult to tell what people are saying sometimes. So you sit on the phone. Again, you cannot judge. It's at the end of these calls, if they do go the way that some of these calls do, for me, I feel so privileged and so honoured to be there, to have held someone's hand in that situation, and to have been the last person. As far as you know, you will never know. and to be the last person they talk to. So it's quiet. You listen to them. There will be periods of quiet. You ask, are they still there? Might be a period of quiet. You can hear breathing and then a voice. And usually, or in the case, it happened to me once. My memory tries to tell me that it's happened twice. I can only really think it's that, but it may have done. It was a long time ago. But then in this case, you sit there and there are periods of quiet and silence. When they say silence is deafening, it is. You feel like you're in a vacuum. You feel like all the air's been dragged out of the situation. And it's just you and this other person. And the periods are quiet. And then they may talk a little. But usually, they're not talking about that situation, about what they are doing, because that decision has already been made. Things have been put into place where quite often the conclusion is by this time is cut and dried. And you listen. And there were periods of quiet, and then periods of quiet may go on longer. The breathing may become shallower. With a bit of luck, perhaps you're just falling asleep, and we'll wake up and we'll ring in again and be able to talk to you. But all you can do is sit there, and you sit there until that period of quiet, with you asking are they still there, goes on. I usually had it in my head that it will be 20 minutes, but it just goes on until your own judgment tells you that there's no one there at the other end of the phone to talk to you. And it isn't as traumatic as you think. And I don't know whether that's just down to your training, empathy between two human beings, the absolute privilege you feel to have been there. I don't know. But you will never know. And then you really are talked through that at the end of the shift. And I can remember vividly it happening. I can remember the situation. I can remember what it sounded like on the phone. And I think because of my training, I didn't really have any kind of huge emotions going on. I just sat there and listened. And that happens every so often. May never happen in a Samaritan's career. May happen a few times. But to actually put it to its bare bones, I think I'd rather have somebody there to talk to in my last moments than no one. No family there to hold your hand. So a Samaritan will hold your hand to the best of their capabilities. Anyway, I hope you've liked this little video. It's just something I've felt I needed to put out that I have. Samaritans have been going on in my mind. I've thought about going again since then, but I don't know. I've done it. Anyway, it's Thursday now, so it'll soon be weekend. We're going to go and get a bottle of wine. My phone's just gone. That'll be my prescription ready to pick up. The real world. We're back in the real world. See you all next time. Please subscribe. Peace and love.